My place card at my wife's company gala read, "Idiot trash." She saw it. Her boss saw it. And the two of them laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes with a cocktail napkin. I didn't say a word. I stood up, straightened my jacket, found the president of the company across the ballroom and whispered exactly 2 sentences in his ear. Then I walked out into the Seattle rain and drove home alone. The next morning at 9 a.m., an all-staff email went out to 100 employees. Subject line, company ownership transition, effective immediately. Every position in that department was terminated by lunch. My name is Sterling Vance. I'm 48 years old, and up until that Friday night in October, my wife believed I was just a quiet man with a boring consulting job who paid half the mortgage and stayed out of her way. She had no idea I owned 61% of the company she worked for. She had no idea because I made absolutely sure she never would. I live in Laurelhurst, a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the shore of Lake Washington. I drive a 2019 Honda Accord, wear the same 3 Navy sport coats on rotation, and eat lunch at the same deli every day. Nobody would ever guess that 14 years ago, I sold a logistics software company for $340 million and quietly rolled that money into a private holding company, Vance Meridian Capital. Among other things, we owned the controlling stake in Bellwether Meridian Group, the mid-size marketing firm where my wife Claudine had worked for 6 years. She never once suspected that the silent majority shareholder she complained about over dinner, some ghost investor nobody's ever met, she called him, was sitting across the table eating his turkey sandwich and nodding along. I liked her confidence when we met 11 years ago, but over the last few years, something in our marriage had been curdling. I'd been too patient to call it what it was. The real rot, however, lived in her office, embodied by her boss, Preston Kilgore. Preston was the senior vice president of client relations, a man who drove a Tesla he mentioned in every conversation and had a talent for making people feel important right until they were no longer useful. I'd met him twice at company mixers. Both times he called me champ and immediately forgot I existed. Preston didn't know who signed off on his budget every quarter or whose signature was on the building lease. He only knew I was Claudine's quiet, irrelevant husband. The first real warning came 18 months before the gala. My board was reviewing department performance, and Claudine's team submitted a bloated $400,000 proposal for a launch party. On closer inspection, $90,000 of it was allocated to a brand consultant company owned by Preston's college roommate, an undisclosed conflict of interest. I killed the budget, sending it back through the CFO to be corrected. Standard corporate governance. What I didn't expect was for Preston to spend the next 2 weeks loudly blaming some ghost investor upstairs who doesn't understand the industry. Worse, Claudine came home and repeated those exact complaints to me with deep contempt. She rolled her eyes at the idea of me, without knowing it was me. I sat there with a forkful of salmon and felt something in my chest go completely cold. It wasn't rage. It was the quiet recognition that my wife had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. I started paying attention. Over the following months, Claudine's late nights clustered suspiciously around Thursdays. I checked Preston's calendar through our administrative systems. Those nights were always blocked off as strategy sessions. She bought new, muskier perfume. Her engagement with our marriage thinned out to the absolute minimum. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't need to. Preston was sloppy in the way men get when they've never faced a consequence in their lives. I found the corporate card statements, 2 or 3 dinners a month at high-end restaurants, and a hotel charge from July at the Fairmont downtown, filed under a fake client account. They were having an affair, conducted almost entirely on my company's money, laundered through expense reports I had the power to flag with a single email. There is a particular humiliation in realizing your wife is cheating on you using your own money under your own roof. I made a decision in September, 5 weeks before the gala. I wasn't going to confront her across the kitchen table or have a boring procedural HR meeting. I was going to let them believe they were untouchable, and then I was going to end it in a way so complete and public that neither of them would ever underestimate a quiet man again. The Bellwether Meridian Fall Gala was held every October at the Fairmont Olympic, the exact hotel where Preston had filed his fraudulent room charge. 600 employees, clients, and vendors were in attendance. I had never gone in 6 years, always inventing an excuse. This time I told Claudine I wanted to go. For 5 weeks I played the attentive husband in public. In private, I was on the phone with our CEO Harold Whitfield laying groundwork. I also accelerated the process of selling Bellwether Meridian Group. A national conglomerate, Ashford Bell Partners, had been trying to buy us out for a year. They had one non-negotiable condition, a full restructuring of the client engagement division, meaning Preston's entire team would be eliminated and replaced within 90 days of closing. I finalized the term sheet on a Wednesday. Closing was set for the Monday after the gala. I told Harold I wanted the announcement to go out company-wide first thing Monday morning, with no advanced warning to department heads. The night of the gala arrived. Claudine wore a deep emerald dress and looked genuinely happy. The Fairmont's grand ballroom was lit in gold, filled with jazz music and laughter. I made my way to table 14 alone, while Claudine drifted toward the champagne. I found my seat and picked up the calligraphed place card to check my name. It read, "Idiot Trash." It felt entirely clinical. I turned the card over, looking for an explanation, but found none. I looked up and saw Claudine 20 feet away, laughing with her hand pressed against Preston's forearm. Both of them were glancing toward my table, with the unmistakable body language of people watching a joke land. Preston said something else, and Claudine laughed so hard she had to dab her eyes with a napkin. Later, I learned Preston had ordered a young coordinator to swap the card out as a cruel prank, because he believed I was nobody worth being careful around. I sat at the table for 90 seconds. The last hopeful part of me closed like a door settling into its frame. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked across the ballroom toward Harold. Standing beside him was Desmond Ruiz, the president of Ashford Bell Partners, who had flown in as my private guest. I leaned in close to Desmond and said exactly 2 sentences. The client engagement division has a serious documented conflict of interest and fraud problem under its current leadership. I want it gone in the first restructuring wave, effective the moment we close. Desmond nodded. Understood. That's your call to make. I didn't go back to the table. I grabbed my coat, left the hotel, and drove home through the rain. I sat in my study until 2 a.m., finalizing the last details with my legal team. Claudine came home around 1 a.m. She walked into my study, an edge of irritation in her voice. She told me I had disappeared, and that Preston thought it was weird. I looked at her and said, "I saw my place card. Idiot trash." She actually let out a short laugh before trying to cover it up, claiming it was just a seating mix-up and that I was being sensitive. I looked at this woman I had built a decade of my life around, standing there with smudged makeup, telling me to brush off a public humiliation. I simply told her I was going to bed. The email went out Monday morning at 9:04 a.m. Subject line, ownership transition announcement. The text was bloodless and accurate. Bellwether Meridian had been acquired, and the client engagement division was being restructured, effective immediately. I watched Claudine's face from across the kitchen island as she read it. The color drained from her skin. She panicked, screaming that nobody saw this coming, and tried to call Preston 7 times. He didn't answer. He was currently in a closed-door meeting with corporate lawyers and HR. Learning that his position was terminated and his severance slashed due to the expense fraud I had flagged. Claudine didn't lose her job that day. Her lower-level coordinator role survived the initial wave, though she was placed under a strict new manager from Chicago. When she came home that evening, she looked completely hollowed out. She sat at the kitchen table and whispered that she didn't understand what happened, repeating that Preston said the company was solid. "Preston doesn't know anything about who actually owns that company," I said. "He never did." Something in my tone made her stop and really look at me. "What do you mean, Sterling?" I told her everything. Flatly, like a quarterly board report. I told her about Vance Meridian Capital, my 61% stake in the firm, and the budget I had killed months ago. I told her about the Fairmont hotel charges, the canless dinners, and the 18 months of fraudulent expense reports. I told her about the 2 sentences I whispered to Desmond Ruiz while she was laughing at my place card. I told her the sale had been moving forward for a year, and her affair had simply made me stop hesitating on the timing. She didn't scream. She just sat there, frozen, After a long silence, she said, "You let me humiliate you at the gala. You just sat there and let me." "I've been letting you underestimate me for 6 years," I replied. The card just made it easier to stop. The divorce papers are currently in progress. Claudine moved out into a rental in Ballard, chasing what's left of her career under a management team that has no tolerance for her history. Preston Kilgore is broke, fighting a fraud referral with a lawyer he can barely afford, blacklisted from every marketing firm in Seattle. I still eat lunch at the same deli, and Donna still knows my order. I still drive my Accord, because I've never seen the point of a car that announces things about a man that aren't true anyway. I sold my steak, I cleaned house, and for the first time in a very long time I finally have some peace.